I stood on the porch of a white clapboard house with inviting sun yellow trim. 6 or 7 years ago, I would have done anything to get out of this town. Now, I was ready to do just about anything to get back in, including respond to a Craigslist ad. It took a relatively short time to get to this point, but the years between leaving home and returning had been so long that I felt like a ghost returning to a former life. I'd spent 4 fantastic years at a small college in Vermont. Then my ambition and a journalism degree led me to New York City. It was there, in my lonely, cockroach-infested apartment in Washington Heights, that I decided I really needed to go home. After only 2 years in Manhattan, I was ready to return to the Hudson Valley. I spent a year in Beacon before the increasing prices, decreasing parking spaces, and floods of weekend tourists sent me even further up the Hudson line. I ended up right back in Wappingers Falls, the same sleepy village where my mother grew up and where I spent most of my time as a kid. This porch reminds me of my grandparents' old house on the other side of the village, I told John, the homeowner. My father, who would come along to help with my apartment hunt, added, "Maybe you knew her grandparents, the Bakis. We used to go over there for dinner several nights a week." "Baki," John said, "of course, Atilia Baki." I smiled. That was my grandmother. "Mrs. Baki came here the day we moved in," John continued. "She sent her husband to take a big old stove off my hands, said this house belonged to her parents, and that she had fond memories of many good meals here." Startled, I turned to my dad. "Is this the house that Noni grew up in?" My father's eyes widened. "That's what it sounds like. I never knew which one it was. Your mother would know." My maternal grandmother, or Noni, as we called her, died in 2011 during my senior year of high school. I was devastated when Mom and her siblings decided to sell her house, the one on the other side of the village, where she'd lived with my grandfather and cooked 2 generations worth of Friday night dinners. But while we may not have been able to preserve that house and those memories, I had a strong and sudden sense that I'd somehow been drawn to Nani's childhood home to awaken other memories and create new ones of my own. Perhaps it was my grandmother who led me all the way to Vermont, then to New York City, and finally back home. Perhaps she knew this was where I belonged and that I simply needed to take my own route here. A few weeks later, in mid-November, my dad and I were rushing to get everything from the moving van inside my new old house because the forecast indicated the first snow of the season could start any minute. We discovered that my new landlord had left a welcome note with a surprise gift, a photocopy of an old black and white image of a large family, my family, standing on the very same porch. My mother, arriving to help with the last of my move, gasped as she got out of the car. "This is it," she said, her eyes welling. Mom rushed inside to look around, turning on lights in every room. "Your grandmother is watching over you," she said. And as I struggled up the porch steps with my last box, the first snowflakes began to fall.